Well, so in that activity, you've hopefully looked at some of the benefits and the implications of your collaborative relationships. But we can think about the implications as benefits in two categories. The first is the sharing of risk, and that can be things such as cost, investment, resources. It could be a risk to your reputation. It could be research and development, and then there's the risk of getting it wrong, so we have to take all these things into account. And furthermore, as each partnership has a different knowledge base, there are opportunities for sharing of knowledge, and we need to think about what you've identified in your thing, and think about whether they fit into either of those categories. These things can benefit both parties, and a lot of the time they're the main reason for the collaborative relationship. By that I mean either to share risk or to develop and share knowledge. But sharing and managing both knowledge and or risks can have significant implications for both parties, and it can bring with it potential risks, which we'll have a look at in the next slide. And with all the talks of benefits of collaborative relationships, we could think that there's no risks, but there are potential risks, and some of those are on this list here. Does the outcome justify the time and resources invested? Sometimes it seems a nice idea and it may bring some benefits, but these can be outweighed by the time or resources that need to be put into this collaboration if it's going to be effective. But we need to assess this because it could be that it's for the long game and we're talking about something that's for the future, so we may need to invest. It could be a loss of flexibility in working practices. What I mean is if we're tied to an agreement or linked to a partner, or even if we're just loosely linked to another organisation, team or department, it might mean considering the impact on them before we do things, before reacting and changing, and it could bring more scrutiny. It could increase the complexity of the decision-making process and a loss of autonomy. Links with, like we just talked above, especially if it's a formal project, may take time to get things through the process and to get agreement, and that can divert energy and resources away from core aims. So you could be drifting away from your mission or your focus and focusing too much on the collaborative things as they grow. I think, things change. The European Union started as a trading bloc, and now we're in a situation we're trying to exit Brexit. So, things develop. And also, there could be damage or dilution of your brand or reputation. Are the other parties of the same stature or of the same reputation? Is their brand as important to them? If not, if things aren't equal, this could be an area that could cause issues because there'll be different impacts on different organisations. And then there's a damage to the organisation and a waste of resources. If things go wrong, as I mentioned before, and I know we shouldn't be being negative, if it's unsuccessful, what will be the impact on your ways of working and the resources that have been put into it that are now lost? Can we absorb that? What will be the impact on individuals and the balance sheets? We need to be able to afford for it to go wrong, so we need to have contingency in place, and that includes possibly supporting individuals who've been involved, who feel their time's been wasted or unfulfilled. And then there's a lack of awareness of legal obligations. We talked about some of them being partnerships where there's a formal agreement, but in any collaboration, people or organisations sometimes don't realise what they've committed, and sometimes it's not financial, it might be other areas, but they don't realise what they're committed to, and they get caught out. And that leads really as probably links to the last one, which is stakeholder confusion, where parties aren't sure about what their expectations are, what their wants and their needs are, and therefore there are sort of confusion in what's going on and how things should be handled. So these are some of the potential risks that we should be aware of before we get into this fantastic thing of collaboration. As we said when we were talking about the benefits, we said one of them was knowledge sharing, and this could be a great advantage for an organisation entering into a collaboration in the form of some sort of knowledge network to create and share new knowledge with other stakeholders. The value of this can be huge, but if the organisations involved, the stakeholders, are in competition, then it really isn't a collaboration, it's a co-opetition. A strange word. It's a sort of setting where partners are simultaneously cooperating and competing with each other at the same time, and this can carry a big risk around the management of knowledge. The aim of collaborating is to bring the benefits of gaining knowledge and sharing best practice and ultimately creating new knowledge, the reciprocal sharing of knowledge and possibly of other resources. But this needs to be managed and monitored and carefully designed. If other stakeholders are in competition with you, they will feel a need to gain the maximum potential benefit out of it, and then they become as if they're looking for a competitive advantage, and this can have negative effects. We can be leaking critical information to competitors. We can be getting bogged down in the pursuit of trying to gain a competitive advantage off of other people. So we need to be careful with knowledge management and the sharing of this knowledge. We need to make sure that we're in the right type of collaborative arrangement. And even when it's internal teams or external partners, or just as a member of a network, we need to be encouraging the sharing of good practice, but we need to make sure that we're looking after our information. So it's really sharing of best practice that we're looking for, and that's what we need to focus on. And there are some key behaviours and procedures, rule factors that we can use if we're going to get into collective relationships to identify and share good practice, but protect ourselves against those risks with our information. First of all, there needs to be a plan. So we need to create a plan that says how we're going to share it. So designs and sets out what we're going to share, what best practice is going to be, and who potentially can benefit from it. This is going to include things such as recruiting support for it, creating a demand for it, and promoting joint learning that we've talked about before. So really we're talking about a set of strategic rules, a plan of how, what, when, and why. And as part of that plan, we're going to be looking for successes. So really we need to make someone in this collaborative partnership responsible for identifying and highlighting this best practice that we're going to share. It might be best if it's a team effort, coordinated by one person, say, but if we've got teams, it means it can be shared among the stakeholders, organisations, departments, teams, whoever's in this relationship, and they can look for their own internal examples of successes and they can be shared. If it's in a team, it ensures that we haven't got like one team that's seen as favourites, and maybe we'll have things like a champion for best practice in each area. Next, we need to investigate those and validate those best practices. So what we're talking about here is once we've identified them, we need to ascertain which actual practices that we've seen account for the success. I mean by that, for example, we need to determine whether it's an environmental or a personal factor, is it an individual, rather than is it about the overall internal practice that is accounting for the success. Part of this might be benchmarking this to compare the performance against similar individuals, teams, departments, organisations. That can be very useful, especially if they're performing exactly the same activities. And once we've done that, we then need to document that best practice. It needs to be recorded. Needs to be some sort of description of what happens. An example of the best practice needs to be produced so that it can be documented for review, for later evaluation. Somebody somewhere needs to be identified for the recording and storage of these so that they can be shared with related people later on, and then so that other people can learn from the hands-on experience. It could be that there'll be a committee that's responsible for it, or it could be placed on a company intranet, but it needs to be recorded. And finally, we need to adapt and apply. This is the last step to help people produce that best practice within their own settings, so they've got to contextualize it. It is not always about just enforcing it or following it. They may need to adapt it because it may not directly work in their workplace or in their role, and it may not be exactly the same as when it was developed. We don't just want to chuck it away. For example, guidelines could be developed that say how it could be interpreted for different settings, but we need to make sure, because these might seem really simple steps if you're already doing them, and they could seem rather labour intensive if you're not. But many places talk about sharing best practice, using best practice, but in reality it starts, and then as they get busy or things get overrun within the workplace, they really don't do anything with it. So they identify it and then they just leave it, It gets lost in the everyday practices of natural business, or it gets put in place, and then because it hasn't been documented, hasn't been recorded, as the business gets busy again, everyone just goes back to what they were doing, their old practices before, and everything's been lost. So, key steps for making sure that we share and use best practice. So, just coming to the end of this session now, I just want to recap. So, we said we were going to look at how to use collaborative working techniques. We've looked at factors right from the beginning, right from when we said about knowing yourself. We looked at the different types of relationships and how they can be used. We did an activity where you read some resources and researched around choosing the right collaborations and implications. We went on then to look at implications about sharing risk and sharing knowledge, and we've looked at networking and sharing best practice, and we're going to reinforce some of those with activity in a minute before moving on to the next section. So we'll just have a look at the activity. So in this activity, we're going to look at how we can link collaboration with conflict management, because we're going to be looking at conflict management in the next section. So I want you to watch a video about collaboration and about defensiveness, and think about that within the conflicts situations you've possibly seen within your organization where collaboration perhaps hasn't been working. So think of some internal or external. There's a little worksheet again for this, and then just highlight what you think has been done or could have been done to improve the situation. So you've got a couple of articles to read as well as part of your research. There's one around collaborating with external partners, and there's another one about which kind of collaboration is right for you. So have a look at those, watch the video, because that links into the next session, and then I'll see you after you've completed and uploaded that.